SpotlightOnPodcast.com/store is the place to go to get a Spotlight On collectible for the music and arts lover in your life, or maybe even yourself. Go to SpotlightOnPodcast.com/store today. Hello and welcome to Spotlight On, a production of 23 Media Ventures. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Today, the spotlight shines on Modena, Italy-based sound artist and percussionist Riccardo La Foresta. Riccardo has spent the last several years exploring the Drummophone, an array of bass drums that create sound by being confronted with compressed air and which, in turn, produce complex acoustic drones. By combining the Drummophone with other electro-acoustic devices, as well as changes in the air pressure in the room where it is set up, a generative system results, one that can create endless possibilities in sound. In this engaging conversation, we discussed Riccardo's musical journey, his experimentation in percussion, and his exploration of new techniques and approaches to drumming. We also got into the evolution of drums and percussion instruments, the influence of acoustics on composition, and the potential for drumming education in conservatory settings. Enjoy. Very excited to talk with you. I've spent the last few hours listening to the new album and, more importantly, watching a bunch of performance videos on YouTube because I was so fascinated about what the live presentation of what you do would look like. Hopefully, we'll get into that a little bit later. But by way of starting, could you talk to me a little bit about your earlier history with music? Did you grow up a musician? Were you a drummer or a percussionist? I'd love to get that context before we talk about what you do now.
Basically, I would say that before being 17 years old, I didn't even know what blues was or what a bass was or the difference between a bass or a guitar. Then I felt like some kind of urge to discover music, maybe, to get on track compared to my friends. Basically, I started to ask around, give me some suggestions, write down lists of bands and music to listen to. And then I just listened to everything basically that people suggested me to listen to. And suddenly one day, while listening to Rage Against the Machine, I just thought, I want to play drums. So I just found the first friend with a drum kit and asked, can I try that? And then was first sight. The moment I touched the drums, I was like, oh yeah, so I'm going to do this. And I was 18. By the time I was more or less, I had to decide whether to go to university, go to work, which university, and I was like, no, I want to play music. 100% fully committed to study and practicing. I started to study also. I was already playing drums since maybe 1 year or something. I started to play piano, study music theory, to then pass an exam and get admitted to enroll in conservatory. And I studied jazz. So actually my first concert was a jazz concert at the end. It was a very fast process because I really, just from 0 to 100, practicing every day from the moment I started. So my first concert was a jazz concert. My background is rooted in jazz because that was basically the only study possibility, that felt convincing for doing this as a life choice. I don't going to the conservatory. For what I knew, at least at the time, the spectrum of possibilities, okay, I want to be a musician. What can I do? I'm not going to play timpani and study classical music. That was not the idea. The jazz courses in the conservatory seemed the only choice, but also a good choice because that's been very helpful for general knowledge in music. But soon I got tired, I got sick, I would say, of it at first. Couple of years, I started to play more free jazz, improvised music, and avant jazz, fastly going away from jazz music, let's say. And then from there, I started to play solo concerts. I quit all the jazz bands, the jazz project to dedicate to my own research. That was more or less 9 years ago, 2015, my first solo concert, I think. So, and I was already playing a lot of jazz around, playing with a lot of musicians. That was working somehow, but I needed to just quit everything to focus. And I started playing with a lot of percussion, extended techniques, a lot of different instruments. Like you often see drummers, percussionists with extended kits and instrumentation, generally like an orchestrum of possibilities.
Yeah.
But then soon I found one specific technique or effect that interested me more. I just decided to focus on that and to develop that. And that became later the Drummophone, this wind instrument obtained from a drum and the cymbal, passed through a variety of versions and developments over the years, because quite a lot of possibilities related to pneumatic sources could be starting from the breath, of course, with circular breathing and preparations of the drum, to then playing also arpeggio on the drums, or it's quite a vast.
You mentioned your first solo shows in 2015. What instrument were you sitting at? Were you at a trap drum set? Were you in a percussion circle? What were you doing?
That was a drum set as a starting point, with cowbells, like metals and parts extended the percussion. But the root of the instrument, the base of the instrument, was definitely a drum kit. Yeah, but I was mainly playing with bows or playing maybe standing up Tony Hawk play, with gestural motions, trying to approach the instrument, reversing the basic concepts, trying to find something that, of course, you take inspiration by the things that inspires you, basically. The musicians and the things that you find interesting, and then you start to maybe emulate at the beginning. So you have this messy condensation and of too much.
You have to take things away. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can do that. But I think, at least for me, the way it worked was that I needed to explore all the possibilities. I started to explore at any extended, any non-traditional percussive possibility that I could reach, then grab, and then, okay, this one I don't like. I like this. I like to do this way, until I found something that was like, okay, so this is what interests me, and then I developed my own thing.
Do you know in retrospect, or did you know at the time, what you were searching for in all of this experimentation? Was there a sound in your head you were trying to express, or a feeling you were trying to convey? What was driving you?
I wouldn't say there was a feeling, but definitely sound is always the factor somehow. Well, also, sometimes it's just things that happen by chance, because you're just fucking around, basically. The saying, the more you fuck around, the more you find out. It actually applies. It actually applies. It's true. But you need to have that inner force, that curiosity and that necessity to be curious. And one thing that I learned about, let's say, myself, and that became more clear just recently, actually, It's that one main part of my approach to music, and I would say more or less life generally, but it's like procrastination. Because actually procrastination, like in a functional way, gives you the opportunity to digest, or it forces you to somehow, like deal with what you made.
Sit with it.
Sit with it, and then you digest it, and then, okay, after a while, suddenly one day you're super bored, and the idea or the solution to the problem that you already forgot because it was a problem maybe 6 months ago, and then you have new, fresh ideas to develop. Generally, it's always sound. There was a sound that was interesting to me, and then I was like, okay, this one, what can I do with this? How do I make it more convenient? Because maybe technically there's some issues.
One of the things I read, I think it was in your biography or in one of the pieces of material about you, the quote was that your work questions the role of the drum as a percussion instrument. It's an easy line to say, but it seems to hide so much because it's almost like questioning whether a dog barks or, and how do you separate the idea of a drum from the function of percussion or the category of percussion? What got you along that train of thought?
That's kind of tricky, but if you imagine to just drop the instrument that I'm playing now somewhere else, like maybe on another planet.
No context.
No context, where there's people that have no idea what a drum is, and they just find this. Maybe they start to play that the way I'm playing it now.
Okay.
And not the way it started to. Because, of course, drums carries like percussion instrument, but drums specifically carry centuries and millennia like of history as a communication instrument first, and then like everything that comes after that. But especially in the last 50, 70 years, all these topics of what an instrument actually is, everything is basically a percussion, like the way contemporary music developed after Second World War. And there's so much, still possible, even with traditional instruments. But isn't this like actually the area in which we are actually questioning the statements?
Challenging the assertions or...
Yeah, I don't want to go specifically in some directions, but this is actually the area of questioning some basics.
Yeah.
I'm playing the drum with the air, so why is that like a percussive instrument? Maybe like in 50 years from now, there will be like some Asian or Australian guy playing the flight of Bumblebee, like on the drum, because now I'm playing this, and then you develop the technique. And the technique brings like all this package of instruments, instrumental development, technical development. Now, like I'm limited by my own knowledge, but this is how you pass along the tradition and you evolve the tradition. And technically the instrumentations. So maybe like in 50 years, that will be taught in Drummophone, will be taught in conservatories, and there will be like a repertoire. And because I'm fucking around playing melodies now, like I have my own way of doing it, but maybe there's someone else that if starts to do this can develop like something completely different. But how do you pick up an instrument today and what you do with it? Every fucking instrument. You take a guitar, you have the guitar tabs, you have the chords, you have like histories of music, you have methods. You don't question how to play that. If someone gives you like a drum, you know that you have to bang it, but there's so many different ways to play that. But you take a guitar and there's like a repertoire, there's music preferences. Even though you maybe start with something that, like chord progression of a song from 20 years ago, the guitar exists since much more.
Before we talk more specifically about the Drummophone, there was something else that I was curious. I was wondering if you could share a little of your knowledge with our listeners about, which is one of the things that I read, I think it's something you wrote about the modern history of drums and percussion instruments, and about, if I'm understanding correctly, it's really only come to be like a manufactured instrument or a commercial instrument really within the last 120 years or around the turn of the last century. And I'm very curious about what was the drum before that, I mean, I have these images of like a very simple, a snare drum around somebody's neck, like in a fife and drum kind of thing. But just to root our conversation a little bit in tradition, where did the modern idea of a drum set come from?
That comes from jazz.
So the jazz players assembled a kit.
Yeah, that happened for what I know, because then there might be some different versions of this story, but for what I remember, at least, during the Prohibition era, basically music was only allowed in New Orleans and generally like in the States inside. So marching bands, they had the different drum parts, like sampled by different musicians. They had to fit in a small club, and there was not enough space. So they had to invent the hi-hat. Why we call it hi-hat? Now, I don't want to say something stupid, because this is the way I know, but I wouldn't put my hand on the fire, but I'm quite sure of what I'm saying. It was called low hat before, because it was just for the foot, because it just had to reproduce like this movement, the clapping movement of the percussionist with the two cymbals. Then maybe for the first years it was like this. Then they made it higher, because we can also play it. So it's a process. We can also play it with the hands, but at the beginning it was just very basic. Okay, we don't have the space for 5 percussionists. We can only fit 1. How do we do this? By necessity. The struggle of necessity, I think it's probably, like one of the main motivational reasons behind music development. It can be, like for private personal reasons, like a composer's life condition. We all know that Bach needed to compose a lot because he had a lot of sub beats, very basic thing. But sometimes we separate the necessities and of the life conditions. I remember when I broke my shoulder, actually in 2015, I broke my shoulder. I was like going crazy because I had booked like one of my first long tours with this duo that I had at the time, like 15 gigs all over Europe, like a round trip. We spent so much time booking the tour. And I also had one of my, maybe the second, maybe the third solo concert, right? I just broke my shoulder like a month before. I was like scared. I was getting mad because I didn't know how to do this. Do I need to cancel everything? Do I need to? By necessity, I didn't have one arm, actually my right arm. I needed to develop some more different techniques to play more rhythm. So I started to develop some extended techniques with the hi-hat stand, for instance, making things bounce on it, using it just as a mechanical source instead of with cymbals. So just by necessity, sometimes, like that's what gives you like the solutions that you didn't think before.
We'll be back with more Spotlight On right after this break. Did you know that Spotlight On is completely self-funded by the team that produces it? We're looking for ways to keep the podcast self-sufficient without sacrificing the listener experience or the integrity of the show. The best way we could think of was to ask for the support of our listeners. Please consider making a donation to help cover our annual operating expenses. Go to spotlightonpodcast.com and click the word donate. If you can, please do. And if you cannot, please continue to enjoy the show. We're happy to have you as a listener. Thanks. And now, back to Spotlight On. Along those lines, what was the genesis of the Drummophone? Does the first version of it differ very much from what you have now, or was it sort of a fully formed concept?
Definitely different. It's the ongoing process. So it started by basically me emulating this one technique that few experimental percussionists use, which consists on like blowing into the hole of a flipped cymbal on top of a drum. Could be a cymbal, could be anything with a bell shape. Any bell-shaped object, I would say, would work, but the cymbal, like, it's easy to get.
You already have one.
Yeah, you have that, so you just you flip it, and then from there. But then I was just playing it the same way, just emulating like the same techniques and the same sounds that also the others were playing. And then you basically bend yourself on top of the drum and then you blow, you have like your head full of blood, your lungs are closed. It's not really, you cannot play more than just a note or like a sound, noise. And you just use this as an effect.
You can't make chords and melody and things like that.
I would say the main difference, and this is why I gave it a name, because then I developed some sort of technique or techniques and a vocabulary for it. And that's what aims to make it an instrument and not just a sound effect, because with percussion instrument, what happens is that most of the time you just treat everything as a sound effect, because anything is a sound, is a percussion. You know, you can bang on anything, you can scratch on anything, you can touch anything, even the air, you can make sound out of the air. Anything can be a percussion instrument? Yes, okay. So anything is generally, not every time, but it's too often, for my personal taste, treated as a sound effect rather than develop and dig into what are all the possibilities that, okay, it's just like every time opening these small windows, but never checking what's inside. Mm-hmm. So I didn't want to do that. And I felt like particularly interested in this technique. So I started to think, I'm going to do this. Maybe a tube, or maybe something, maybe some rigid tubes. And then when I found a way of making it at least less comfortable, then I could actually play. Then from playing it, you just discover like the possibilities that you have, the techniques, the preparations, what the different sounds that you get. And then you start to fuck around with like the quality of the drum skins, of the drum, the size of the drum, the preparations that you can do, the size and the dimensions, the proportions of the cymbal, the position, you know, like anything that then relates. Imagine like you get the saxophone today, but it's a pretty complicated instrument to think of. Now it's pretty easy because you just said it, but I think it took like ages to finally get to the prototype that we actually have today, which is a standard. That's it, because that works. Quite sure the first saxophone didn't work that well. Because you needed to, it didn't sound that well. You needed to develop it. So I have my own limits. So I think I'm quite happy to just play with it and see the possibilities of the instrument. So definitely it was very different, because mostly today I'm not playing with the breath. I'm just keeping that first years of development and own vocabulary to improvisational sets or specific situations. Because maybe 4 or 5 years I've been working with motors or electric pumps and any kind of motorized pneumatic source. So I'm mostly focused on that and more on the installation aspect and architectural aspect of sound. So it drastically also changed the way I approach performance.
Hearing you articulate that helps me a lot. It helps bridge a little bit of a gap in my understanding, because like I said when we first were speaking, I was watching the earlier performance videos of you from almost 8 years ago now, 2017, 2018-ish. And it was very much you operating the Drummophone in real time through a series of tubes and breath. And my understanding now, and I wanted to ask you how it was achieved, is that it has the ability to be much more of a generative instrument. So you can basically, for lack of a better way to say it, you could set it running. You can initiate a process, but you don't have to sit there and play it. Am I saying it the right way?
Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, this is exactly what I do, you know, what I was actually looking for, because when I started to use the motors, the driving reason, you know, like it's basically, okay, how do they play more than one? This was the first issue I encountered. Okay, how do you play more than one? So I found out that it wasn't that easy, because even if I want to play, okay, maybe I have 2 hands and that's it, but what if more than 2? Okay, let's start to work with the motors. And then the motors just allows you to, it's like when you play a drum with an instrument and it just resonates.
Yeah.
Or play with the organ and you just leave like a weight on a key. There's people who do that. There's people who develop like a practice around this. So what actually allowed me to do was to take a distance from the instrument and actually listen to it from a different perspective. Because if the instrument is playing by himself, it opens up also like a variety of philosophical questions, like am I playing it or not?
Yeah.
But besides that, it gives you the possibility to, what I found most interesting was to listen to the instruments from the perspective of the audience.
To hear the drone, to hear the patterns.
Yeah, exactly. This is that specifically with drums that it's complicated because the drum kit, it's an instrument that you have the snare. When you play drums like traditional, you have the snare projecting the sound right to your face. And then you have the kick, which actually you feel less loud than from in front of the drum.
Yeah.
So actually, you know, like you with the experience and practice, then you learn how to balance these volumes and these nuances. But you never get to listen to yourself from a few meters away because you're playing there. This was actually inspiring because it's like when you have a sound check, there's someone doing the sound for you outside. And you can do that with an acoustic instrument. So it just changed the way I also then approached the performance, because then I was like, okay, so I can take advantage of this. So I can actually check how it is sounding now in the room, and I can work and I can experience this. And from there, so I started to stand up and walk around while performing. And the first time I never said anything, let's say, I never say anything actually, but then people started to understand that they could do it as well. And now I generally ask to have no seated audience, so then people can be free to move around. And you can actually hear like the sound changing, because the drum, the way the Drummophone works, it's pure resonation. So the drums project by 360 degrees the sound. The stage and audience duet, let's call it, works because the PA is directional. So you just me here and you there, and you listen to me because my PA is stronger and I project the sound straight to your face. This is the way it works. It's one way. I don't like to be on stage. I don't want to be on stage with this project. Okay, with this project, of course.
Yeah.
It doesn't work because you can only experience what, and me also as well, the only way to experience it, the way I think of it, it's just moving around. So it's best if I'm staying in the middle, if I'm positioned in the middle, and we can all move around. Once like I found like a nice tuning in the room, so playing with the actual architecture, that every time is different. So this is why I don't work, or I haven't worked until now at least, with a composition, because every time it's turned on the drum, there's one sound. Okay, so I found first sound that I like in terms of pitch and the way the room responds, the room harmonics, exactly, and timbre of the instrument, of that sound. And then the next one will just be related to the first one, and the third one related to the other two ones. So every time I turn it on, it's not a temporary instrument. I don't know what actually I'm gonna get.
That's fun.
It is fun. It is fun, and every time is different. But every time is somehow like similar, but it's different. It's very different. Sometimes it's more harsh, and sometimes it's just like that. You know, like you cannot do anything. You get there and you stay there. Some other times it's just like already, because it becomes very simple one chord at the end. You know, so it's always less. I have to say in what I'm doing, there's always less because I'm not even there playing. Yeah.
I really enjoyed watching in some of the more recent videos that aspect of the performance that you talked about, which is of you moving around and walking up to the instrument, stepping aside, walking around it. It's a really different way to experience the interaction between a musician and their tools or their instruments. And I would imagine it's very unique and interesting for an audience to witness that and to see how, to your point, if I stand over here and turn my head, maybe I get a different sense of what the sound is, and you turn your head a different way and you get a different harmonic onslaught. Yeah, and it also helped me understand why you refer to what you do as research, because it sounds like you are still uncovering not only what the form of the instrument is going to take, but how to harness its power or how to channel its power and what it's capable of. Is that the research essentially? Is like you're exploring this new terrain?
Let's say that I don't want to frame what I'm doing by setting up goals like, yeah, I need to play like this composition. I want to play that tune with this instrument, because I think in order to really keep it like fresh for me, I need to don't have like these goals and this, because I just perceive these as limitations. Who needs to play again like that same kind of tune or track, do some covers with this instrument, like just pick up all the other instruments. You don't need like this one. We don't need this, which is fun because actually the title of my first cassette was Does the World Need Another Drum Solo? And it's actually the first recording of the Drummophone. It's a cassette, there's two sides, and it's exactly the same track. Side A is yes, and side B is no. Because if it's yes, then that's a drum solo. I mean, there's a drum. There's drums. If it's no, I mean, it's a drone. It's not a drum solo. So it's up to you, at the end. But I don't need that. Since I'm doing it, then I can decide what I want to do. Maybe other people can do that, and then you're free to do it. You take the drum, take the idea, and develop it that way. If you want to play it like a bambolino, like with the drum, go work your ass, and in 10 years, maybe you can do it. That's not what I want to do. I'm just more curious to discover what are the possibilities and what can I do? What can I be like? How can this refresh my practice and my approach to music and performance and creation generally?
As you start to present your work now more in sort of installation type environments, do you rethink or does it change your perception of what you are and like the lineage you come from? Are I think of things like what the minimalists did, Lamont Young, like it starts to seem more, not less of a musician, but adding in more of a conceptual art component. And I just wonder, like, what's your self-image?
This is actually interesting because I guess now it's also a trend in the music business and everyone becoming like a sound artist, even though for me, being a sound artist has like specific meaning. And I think now I'm a sound artist because I work with sound, not just because of the Drummophone, like I work also with different projects. I do sound installations, sculptures without the Drummophone. And that's actually what I find more interesting these days, if I have to be honest. But like William de Kooning, I need to change to stay the same. Like now I'm back on drums. I quit playing drums live and with projects for some years because I needed to focus on my solo work. But now I'm back also on drums. I even had a rock trio with a click, like in the headphones, and it's interesting because that's new for me. It's kind of the opposite. People maybe play rock and then play improvised music. I did the opposite. It changed the way approaching to the instrument as a more like installative solution to sound, let's say, possibility of sound, definitely changed the way I see myself, because I'm less interested in being the performer. I don't know how I would like to define myself, but definitely I'm not the musician in that context. Though I'm a musician, of course, but not when I'm doing that. I'm not playing. I wouldn't argue with someone saying, but you're not playing, you're not a musician. You know, like, I would just have a nice laugh because feel, you are right. I'm not. I can agree with you in this moment. If someone would complain with me, I paid a ticket because I thought there was someone playing music, and I was like, you're right. maybe I'm not doing that.
You're an architect. Yeah. Could you tell me a little bit about your collaboration and the history of the relationship with James Ginsberg?
Me and James, we shared an evening in Sonica Festival in Ljubljana. I played, and he played, and I think we established a connection in that moment. But before that, I was already, like a fan of Antifat and also of his solo work. Actually, he played with them, Antifat, in Modena, where I live, in a festival that just maybe a couple of years later, I became part of the organization too, which is Node Festival. And a few other times I had the opportunity to hear them live. And this just happened. A robot festival in Bologna asked me for some new work. I had some proposals from them, like, do you want to do something? We can give you, like, the space and the opportunity to develop something, to present something, and premiere, basically, a new work. And I was like, okay. I just asked James, you want to do something? And then we had no idea what we were going to, or maybe we had like some vague idea. Okay, what I'm doing now, it's this. What are you doing now? It's this. So it's just very natural to combine these two elements, because he's been working in the past years with this self-made instrument, with solenoids, with mechanicals like activation, with bass strings. And I've been playing mostly, for 3-4 years, like these 4 bass Drummophone sets. So we just combine the two things. And it's actually interesting because I've been telling myself for the past years, no, I don't want to record my solo set. Because I just felt maybe it was more like, does the world need another drum solo? And was like, no, maybe we don't need that. Like, we don't need that anymore. I wanted to keep that just for live contexts.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so unique and of the moment.
Yeah. Because you just experience that in the moment, and it's a completely different perception, because the recording is too much of a compromise. You just have like microphones, and you can have so many microphones, but at the end, you're just going to listen with 2 speakers or 2 headphones. It's just like a stereo reproduction of what you're listening, and it's not what I'm presenting live, actually.
Yeah.
Much different. So I was like, no, I'm not going to record this. And with James, I actually had the opportunity to, and I'm very happy that we did it, because we found a way to still don't lose this architectural aspect of the sound actually happening, moving in the room, because there's this interaction also between the instruments, with the drums capturing the resonations from the bass amplifiers or the PA, the subs, and vice versa. So there's something happening, especially when you hear it live, which, by the way, in the recording is pretty well captured. Yeah.
I had to ask, are the 2 tracks, 6 and 46, are they the same basic tracks? I'm just curious, like, what's happening there? What is the difference between the 2 tracks, and what's the significance of the song titles?
Oh, that's actually the same track. It's the same. It's not the same track. It's different recordings, but it's the same sequence of rhythms in beats, let's say, and pulses of James' instrument, just slower or faster, and the titles 46 and 6 are the BPMs.
I should have figured that. That seems much more obvious.
Yeah, we didn't. I don't think we put it in the description of the. Maybe we just kept it. I don't remember now. I should check. But yeah, that's the BPMs of the sequence.
Yeah, it's interesting because the 2 tracks, when you listen to them back to back, it almost feels like variations or a suite. It's very thematically tied, and it's not just the tone of the instruments. There's a storyline, or I don't really have the words to nail it down, but it's a self-contained universe.
I'm happy that you say this, because that's exactly the way we think about it. And we spent 3 days in the studio just recording these 2 tracks, because we did like so many versions, looking for, like the perfect one, looking for the best one. They're always better. Well, maybe another one. It is the same. It is the same, because it's just like slower or faster, but the way they are related, it's with this difference, which is not like so much difference, but the space in between these notes gets filled up with more or less harmonics, like in the context of vibrations in between these 2 instruments and sympathetic vibrations. So there's definitely like one line of storytelling that crosses the album, but that's so simple, and primitive. I mean, there's even here, that's nothing. And this is nothing. It's just like a beat and the chord, and that's it. But if you listen to it, it is somehow coming back. Sometimes it's slightly out of tune, and then the rhythm, the way the rhythm is composed also gives you like the sensation that, okay, now this section is approaching, and it's not. Because maybe, there's like a string of lower notes, lower beats that you can recognize, but it's not here. Now it's later. So it is confusing.
Yes, there's something imperfect about it that I love. It doesn't sound digital. And by the way, I listened to the recordings before I read too much about it. I like to do that, because otherwise you go in and there's not mystery. I actually thought that rhythm, the bass, I thought that was the percussion. I thought that was the Drummophone. So I thought that was you banging something. And I couldn't have been more wrong. And in fact, it's nobody banging anything. But what's really neat about it is that it's slightly off rhythm at times. It's not, you can't necessarily set a metronome to it. And it even has different intensities of the hit. It gives it a very human element, despite it being sort of mechanical, if you will. It's almost mystical. I like it.
Because there's basically 6 strings, and they're not playing in unison all the time. Sometimes just 2, sometimes just 3. So there's variations in dynamics and the pitch range as well in the octaves. And that also influences like the drums, because when the lower notes, the audience will listen to this, you can definitely notice it's much more clear there in the lower, in 6, in this lower track, that when the lower bass note hits, you get like a lower fundamental. There is like another pitch that it actually sounds almost like a voice, because it's like, it's a lower octave basically that one drum goes. So there's like this interaction. I mean, I can hear that because I know that, but that's what makes it always, like, okay, so it's not there.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing. You can scroll it and it's not the same, but it sounds the same. And you don't feel that it has changed when you get to the end. But it does a little.
Yeah. Thank you so much for making time to talk about all this, and for letting me sort of probe the process and the mechanics behind it all. I very much appreciate it, and I enjoyed listening to it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lawrence, for having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Riccardo La Foresta. As always, thank you for listening to Spotlight On, a production of 23 Media Ventures. I'm your host and executive producer, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and edited by Michael Donaldson, with theme music by Q Burn's Abstract Message. If you'd like to support our work, please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and then visit us online at spotlightonpodcast.com. There you'll find our free episode archive, weekly postings on our official blog, and a ton more. Thanks for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.